Hello, everyone. This is TJ Randall, and we're letting the participants kind of trickle in here as we go. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute. Okay, I think we have a good amount of attendees already here. So welcome aboard, and we're going to dive in. We have 45 minutes today, and we will be talking about how developer education can give you the winning edge. So just like every webinar, we're recording this. We'll be sending out the recording with a link to the test drive when we're done. And please, I'm watching the questions. Like I said, if you didn't hear me earlier, I'm solo today, so I'm also watching the questions box. Any questions, please add them in, and I'll try to answer them as we go. All right, so let's get started. I'm TJ Randall. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Instruqt. My background is in DevOps technology in enterprise, both in healthcare and insurance. And I currently run the customer success team here at Instruqt. I've actually been a user of Instruqt since 2019. We used it in our practice to basically move and train and educate users how to transform their practices, whether it was CI/CD, whether it was release orchestration, into a more modern DevOps experience. So we had a lot of success with Instruqt. And one of the things I always like to say is for customer success, we get to do this for real. So I get very passionate about these conversations because this is really the day-to-day job, around developer education. So for the next 45 minutes, we're going to look at three topics. Why is developer education important? I think for the folks here, we understand this is near and dear to your heart. What can we learn from some companies that have done it successfully, that are actually actively doing this? And we want to give some practical advice on how you can either launch or improve your developer education program. And just to give you an idea of the scale of this, Instruqt, we have a significant base of customers who are focused on this topic. So the one thing I always say, the benefit of my role, I get to see a lot of great examples of developer education. So I'm always happy to talk about that. And I encourage you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you'd like to have further conversation. So first and foremost, why is developer education important? Well, this was published in 2019, and I would bet that this statistic has actually, the percentage has increased, where more and more sales opportunities are lost as a direct result of developer influence. As we know, that developer is the person we're focusing on in terms of our sales cycles and our education, and understanding that developer is so important. And I really believe that, having a proper education approach and having the right content will really engage them, which turns this statistic around. And just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of, that mythical developer that we're talking about, what does that look like? What's the day-to-day look like? Well, a developer generally, very busy, lots of deadlines, lots of demands. And I think a lot of times people forget that developers tend to be measured by productive output, kind of like that manufacturing line approach to things. And it's not just new concepts. It can be new features, it can be managing existing code bases, it can be upgrading systems. So a lot of different demands and a lot of different context switching throughout the days and weeks. So sales calls, as we know, they're pretty much a distraction to our friends. And the other persona aspect of the persona, I think, that really comes through when you're talking to developers is they tend to be more skeptical, the kind of we've seen it all before mindset. They want to analyze things, they want time to think about things and how do solutions, apply to what they're trying to solve. And as we know, the developer, they prefer to build their own tools. And I think contextually this makes sense, simply because you understand your environment, you understand your problems. So you think, okay, how can I solve this with my own build? And the reality of the matter is they are a strong influence on our economic buyer. So obviously getting the developer focused on our solutions, getting them to help understand, like, how can this help solve the problems that you're encountering is a pretty important thing that we want to make sure we focus on. And one thing I just wanted to kind of talk about here is, I think at the end of the day, if you look at your typical sales cycle, it's kind of like that middle line. Like people, historically have thought about it as like, you fill the top of the funnel, you book your meeting, you do your demo, you get your POC, we move to legal and closed won. But as we're finding more and more, as that developer voice grows, what that really means is there's another leg in your sales cycle. whether we talk about that in terms of a community and engagement model, whether it's a freemium, try before you buy model, or even if you're just a true product-led growth company, you really are actually opening up another leg that your teams need to be aware of. And your developer education becomes even more important when you have a sales model that looks like this. Because even if you're in a traditional sales cycle where your marketing is nurturing those folks as they drop out, maybe out of your sales cycle, educating those folks when they're in the nurture cycle is just as important as supporting them when they're actually trying out your product. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is how you can leverage content across the different use cases for that as well. And at Instruqt, one of the things I like to talk a lot about is we are all about learn by doing. If you haven't heard that story before, you can go on YouTube. We started out with HashiCorp and a consulting engagement where we actually delivered Instruqt interaction through an arcade machine. And I can tell you, we still use those arcade machines today. Here's QCOM Amsterdam, and the developers actually really love this concept. So they're a little tough to move around, but once you can see at the booth, imagine that kind of engagement where you're seeing that persona, that developer mindset that's kind of playful, it's kind of curious, like what's this all about? Then you put an arcade console around that's a really fun experience. But at the end of the day, the message, of course, is learn by doing, hands-on. How do I get involved with your solution, and how do I interact with it? I think the key here is, is to really make it easy to showcase your value. Because as we know, for a developer especially, seeing's not believing. And I think we've all learned that just a front-end demo, that's not going to get you to closed won. Okay, fine. So really, it's that hands-on experience with tooling that the developer, that's where they're going to form their opinions. That's where they're going to analyze how do you and your solution play into the problem stack that they're working through. And because developers are adverse to kind of that high, pressure sales tactics and things like that, they're more of the leave me alone and let me load it up and figure it out myself. That's where that kind of hands-on showcasing your value is just critical to making sure you're successful. Because again, developers make great champions. They're the ones that will turn around to your economic buyer and say, I walked through this solution and I think this will really help us as we're trying to solve X. What more can you ask for when you're trying to showcase your value? So what can we learn from companies that are doing this successfully? So we'll walk through some Instruqt customers. And again, I'm being a little mindful of time. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have them. We'll start with HashiCorp. So their Learn developer site attracts millions of people. And it's incredible because what HashiCorp has been able to do is the concepts that we're talking about today, showcasing their value through hands-on interaction. It's incredible. You can go to their site, you sign up as a HashiCorp developer, you can go through their different tracks. And really, I think it's one of the things that I like an awful lot about that is there's the focus on product. If that's the way that you're kind of evaluating and thinking about things, there's also a bit of the persona in there as well. So you can say like, okay, I'm developing, and I need Terraform involved. What would that look like to combine those concepts? So they do a really good job of basically presenting material in a way that's very easy to consume, as well as very easy to evaluate. MongoDB, if you haven't heard this story, there's actually another webinar that we did recently with MongoDB. But one of the things that, to me, what great looks like here is one of the things Mongo has done is they understand that you have to meet your audience at different points, right? You have to understand like how do they like to consume content and learn. And so one of the things I think that's great about what Mongo's done is they include different aspects in which to learn similar information. So you can either watch videos with language subtitles, you can go through instructional content like your documentation pages, you have your hands-on lab to reinforce what you're learning, and you have knowledge checks as you go through. So there's that nice feedback loop as well. So I think this learning experience is wonderful because if you're coming here, you can learn the way you want to learn, and you can also learn an awful lot of really significant amount of content that applies to what you're trying to solve. Aqua Security, this is an awful fun academy that the Aqua Academy that they built up. And I think a great feature to point out here is leveraging that persona-based approach. So, if you're an administrator trying to implement Aqua Security, there's a series of tracks that will really walk you through the granular, details of what you need to do. And this is nice because it separates you from a different persona, which is maybe you're a developer and you're modernizing your DevOps stack, and you'll be leveraging Aqua Security as part of your CI/CD implementation. That different persona, same tooling. And one thing that Aqua does is they overlap that content. So you can get some administrator without having to go deep diving all the way through if you're a developer, and vice versa. But I really think that Aqua does a great job of focusing on how to implement solutions. How do I run and be successful with the solution? Codefresh. This is an amazing certification story. You know, they really are focused on how do I create like something that just is just world class in terms of certification courses. So they built a GitOps fundamental certification course, which is quite fun. I encourage you to take it. And really, again, leveraging that hands-on approach to say it's not just reading, it's not just, you know, being able to answer some questions. You have to go to the command line and prove that. But I can tell you from a developer education and a developer engagement approach, this is really critical. They've really thought through, like, if I have developers coming and they want to get certified, how can we best do that? How can we best engage them? And their feedback proves it. You know, they get some really amazing feedback in terms of just what they're going to market with. Broadcom, they actually, I'd like to call this one out because I've never seen anything quite like this. Using Instruqt, they've actually built tracks on the mainframe. Who would have thought, right? But I can tell you they did two things that are actually quite remarkable. One, they're running Instruqt on the top of the mainframe, so you're getting a hands-on sandbox learning environment that you can go ahead and dive into and learn interactively with, as well as they've created a fun and interactive way to learn through discovery. So they've built a series of tracks, which are escape rooms. So you talk about like engaging a developer in terms of experience, you get to drop into an escape room, and in order to get out, you have to work through a series of challenges. And again, it's a quite fun way to really engage with people and how they want to learn. Datadog has been really doing amazing things in terms of their courses. And one of the things I like to call out here, and something for you to think about, when they do developer education, they actually provide a fully functional trial account with access after the training. So they focus on the learning. They have a series of tracks with challenges. You will work through those. You get that nice feedback. They do checks to make sure that you're actually successful in terms of what you're learning. And then after that, once you're done with your training, you actually can then continue your work in a real environment. So from just a developer experience perspective, from a sales cycle perspective, you can see that's really beneficial. That keeps the learning going after, you know, the training event. And I know this works well for them, whether they're doing workshops or webinars or things like that. The other thing is that Datadog does quite well is that persona-based learning and really understanding who are the personas that are using my product, and then how can I build engaging content for other personas that are curious and learning how to use the tools. Solo.io Academy. This is actually an amazing example of how they use training content for different aspects of their cycle. So whether they're using that content for live workshops, they use the same content for demos. They also have self-paced learning, all of those different ways in which to approach the learners. This is actually a fun screenshot from the workshop they ran at KubeCon Valencia, where they had a room full of developers, and the whole workshop was literally just developers working through examples through a hands-on mechanism, and the instructor being able to respond to those quickly. But you can imagine, even in a pre-sale cycle, you're in a workshop at an event, that's a pretty great way to sell and showcase your value. So if you think about what Solo.io is doing with their academy, this is a great example of meeting developers where they are, and especially making sure that your content is applicable across different aspects of what you're trying to show. So let's look at, what does great developer education look like? I grabbed this from the Devada State of Developer Report. This is 2019, and again, I would bet that these numbers have gone up. But one thing I thought was actually really interesting about this is if you look on that kind of left-hand side, the things that we've been talking about so far, that kind of hands-on, that really learn by doing, making sure that they have different ways to engage with the content, is really, it shows out here, whether it's tutorials or blog posts, short articles or videos. Developers want to engage with you. They want to engage with you in a way where they can consume that themselves and probably not be led through that, actually work through the problems. And one thing that we'll be talking about is a great way to do that. And one thing that we like to use a lot ourselves is that tell, show, do, apply framework. And if you're not familiar with that, a quick summary is it kind of says what it means, right? You're going to tell somebody a concept, you're going to talk to them about that. Maybe that's through a documentation. You're going to show them that concept. So whether that's through a video or maybe it's through more code or documentation, but then you immediately go to the do phase, which is like, okay, learner, now you do it yourself. And an important thing there is you'll want to make sure that you have feedback for them so that they're able to understand, what did I do it correctly? Did I, follow not just follow directions, but did I comprehend what I was supposed to do? And when you're using this framework, the best part about it is the apply side of things, which means now I've learned this concept. Now I'm going to go and apply that to what I do. One example of that is I used Instruqt to train people like release managers and program managers how to move from Excel spreadsheets and Microsoft project planning and things like that onto our DevOps stack. And what was really nice about what we were able to do is we didn't just tell them, say, okay, you're not going to use the spreadsheet anymore. We were able to talk a little bit about what the new world would look like moving from the old. We were able to show them that through a hands-on interaction, but then we were able to train them on doing that. So one thing that I think about with developer experience as well is it's not always just about the command line. We kind of think about that as the go-to place. It can also be through other concepts or other tools that they're using, whether they're going to be using a UI to interact and do their, their coding and their modifications. So as we've been talking about the 4 must-haves, you have to really, when you're building a developer education program or you're thinking about growing your developer education program, I think these are the 4 things that are just most important for a really great program. So you have your documentation and your sample code. We all know sample code is a critical part of making sure that you have something, because that's where the developers will, that's where they really start to do that critical thinking, like, okay, I understand the concept, I can understand the code, and let me start to work on that. Also development tools, things like integrations, libraries, templates, all of those pieces I think are critical, simply because it's important for, if you want to get to your value as quickly as possible, take out some of the needed research, I guess you'd call it. So if I'm able to look at a template, or if I'm able to import a library, or download an integration from your website, now I have the basic framework. I don't have to figure out like, okay, how do I plug this in and those pieces? I can immediately start to use it. So you can see how that marries to your documentation and your sample code. Tutorials and how-to videos, I think everyone would agree, these are just like, you have to have these as part of your program, because again, meeting people where they're at, how they like to consume content, but also I think it engages different types of learners, and it just makes it easier for them to proceed. They don't have to see a whole list of documents and think, oh, I got to read through that. Even just a summary video sometimes, or a how-to video summary for all the different documents that they'll be leveraging is a nice way to just say, okay, if you're going to work through this process, this is what you need. And then last but not least is training courses and hands-on learning. This is just absolute table stakes in terms of like what you need. You need to be able to have something that reinforces the discovery process of your value and the implementation side of that. So whether it's a certification program on your solution, whether that is actually an academy approach, kind of like what we looked at before, or even if it's just simply a workshop that you can do self-paced or instructor-led, you need to have ways in which these developers are getting experience with your products, and they're doing so in a way that they're actively learning, right? You're telling them, we show them the examples, then they get to do it. Because I promise you, if you do that really well, they will immediately and more actively start to apply what they're learning within their own environment. And when we think back about the sales cycle, isn't that what we really want at the end of the day? We want them to take that learning and apply it as quickly as possible so that then they can start to see real value. So one other aspect I think that's really important about developer education is, I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but our prospects and our customers, they look a little like us. Maybe organizationally, they're not quite the same. But what I would say is a lot of times their learning goals are actually similar across their organization. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're building education content today, often the first thing that we focus on is a couple areas, right? Developer relations or product marketing, really driving the awareness of your solutions. That tends to be a very key focus for our education groups to say, okay, how do we drive awareness of our solutions, and our marketing teams take care of that. And the other thing that marketing is obviously doing, their goal, the key outcome that they're trying to achieve is how to showcase the value of the solution, how to make that connection that this value is there so that people will then start to say, okay, let me take a look at that. And obviously, it's pretty traditional. I think we focus on the sales side of things as well, is how do I connect this solution to what the customer is trying to achieve? What's their outcomes they're trying to achieve? So your customer's trying to reduce churn. You want to showcase how your software will then help them reduce churn, so that when sales thinks of educational content, often they'll be like, okay, how can I show that through a learning and engagement opportunity? Maybe it's like showcasing a self-guided demo of your product. Well, I think the world is expanding in terms of developer education. I think you have the opportunity. Remember, we talked earlier about using your content for like overlapping use cases in different areas of the company. Here's a few that I'm seeing more and more, and I know myself, I use this as well. First and foremost is developer experience. So even upskilling and new skilling your developers. So imagine now if you're taking your educational content that you have in a public facing way for your prospects and customers, and you're leveraging some of that content as well for upskilling your own developers, making them more productive faster, reducing the amount of time that your existing team has to be dedicated to training. I think you can start to see your educational content, in terms of how you form and create that and distribute it, can be used across different use cases. Another one that I'm seeing, and I know I use this an awful lot, was for our partners, right? We want our partners at the end of the day to implement solutions just like we would. Well, isn't that a lot like training one of your own employees? So all of a sudden now your partners, they need to understand what your DevRel, what does that look like? What is your marketing team presenting to the world? So your partners would actually start to go through a training program that includes the groups that we're talking about today. And that even includes even more. So I know for IT, this one's near and dear to my heart back from my DevOps days, is IT at the end of the day, they're trying to understand if we like the solution, we believe in it, we think this is going to help us, that next step that you're going to get your, champions to really champion for you is, how do I successfully run and manage the solution? How do I implement it in a way that'll be successful? And I think, again, if you're seeing the overlap that I'm speaking to, that content for your IT teams is just as important for your partners, and probably just as important for your developers. And of course, training and services, getting teams successful on the solution and learning the how and why. So this kind of maps out the areas in which you're building content for as a developer education program. It might be a little bit bigger than you've actually thought about in the past, but I assure you that if you think of developer education as touching these different areas, the benefit that you'll have is you'll be able to leverage that content across different areas. And I think that makes you just more efficient. And I think it gets these different lines of business all focused on the same thing. Your developer education at the end of the day should talk about your value. So it's not just sales and marketing's job to talk about value. You need your training, your services team to do that as well. So thinking about your entire organization will go a long way there. So let me show you an example of what this can look like. I'm taking out the customer name for this, but the idea here is that this customer is using Instruqt training content for not just their developers, but also for partners and services. And this is a little bit of, they have a 2-week training program. This is what it looks like. Right out of the gate, they've built some developer education content to really validate the skills that you may need. This is important, right? So whether it's a developer and one of your own staff, whether it's a developer during a pre-sale cycle that you're actually just starting to work with the customer, it's important to understand, are they going to have the skills needed? Can you imagine a sales cycle where we say, okay, Mr. Customer, we're getting ready for the POC. One of the things I'd like you to do is take a couple learning tracks to make sure you're ready to basically work through the problems of the POC. That actually would go a long way to say, okay, we have the right people, the right skills on board, and now we're going to showcase value. So this customer then takes that even deeper. And for the first week, they really focus on that kind of developer persona. Like, if I'm a technical person, what are my skills that I need? and not just kind of the vanilla version of that. It's not just Java 101. It's like, how do we do Java in our organization? And then they've actually built a developer project for this. And as I've said, this is across multiple use cases. So now they have a developer project for onboarding their own people. They use that same thing for onboarding partners and their services teams. And I've seen them use that in a sales cycle as well to basically say, okay, here's a developer project that you can use as you're going through a POC process. And then really you can see the concepts are now starting to build where it's like, okay, this software solution is really focused on DevOps and CI/CD. Now they can basically start to say, what does my application stack look like? And how do I build on that? From there, their second week, deep diving even more. And you can see the tell, show, do, apply framework all through this. You can see where they're talking about the skills that are needed. They're showcasing those, and then they're having that hands-on engagement where you kind of have to prove the proof is in the pudding, and then applying that to the real world. So it's like when a person is done, when a learner is done with this learning program, they're going to be a successful developer, or they're going to be a really good partner for you. So you can see this approach, even just from a 2-week engagement perspective of learning, you can see how the content is applicable across multiple parts of your business. And I think you can see that the strategy is such that it really goes after the technical skills that would make that developer, that technical person, successful. And just to finish this concept, I think this is important. This customer extends that from onboarding as well. Remember, we talked about our operations team, where they're going to, they have to run and manage the solution. So building out training content, this makes it much easier as you move forward. So it's not tribal knowledge. It's like your stack, how you've implemented that. And again, it's content that's applicable. So imagine now you have employees that want to upskill. So you have employees looking for, how do I get a new job? How do I get promoted? Or I'm building in a services program where I want to make sure that the services team can replicate our success outwards. Again, this is a really smart investment for customers in terms of developer education, because I think the portability of it is really important. Well, now it's time for a demo because we've talked an awful lot about that. So I'm just going to switch screens here and we're going to start learning in Instruqt. That's interesting. I was just unmuted. Again, I'm sorry, I was solo there. But just to quickly repeat, if you missed that, is one of the things that Instruqt focuses on is you want to have multiple ways in which to engage the learner. You want to be able to showcase in the telling way of that through documentation and video. You want to start to show them that, and that's how Instruqt will do that. They'll guide you through that. And then after that, it's all about hands-on. So as we go to our next challenge, so why Instruqt? One of the things that you're going to see here is we want to make this as self-service as possible. So as we go through this, you are going to see now we have multiple tabs in which a learner is actually going to interact with our application. For this particular challenge, they will be installing some code through the terminal. They'll be working through a web, they can either work in a terminal or an editor, and then they can actually run an application within that sandbox. This is important, and I think this just shows the real-world implementation of tell, show, do, apply. From here, it's just very easy to see how this kind of works. We get our environment overview, and we can actually start to think about, okay, if I have to showcase my value to developer, what are the things that they need to be able to do to be successful? So for example, let's say we want to have them run some code. The nice thing about using Instruqt, we can actually run this within a controlled sandbox environment. We don't have to worry about them breaking anything. And then we can go ahead and then just start to instruct them on how different pieces of this work. So for our example here, you can see that they want to go through a Docker Compose file. And often, this is obviously our test drive. One of the things that I think is I see most of our successful customers doing is, it's not just about installing software. It's, maybe it's configuring the software so the person understands the concept, but then it's taking that to the next level by saying, okay, let's solve a real world challenge when we're doing that. And, we kind of saw some of those examples as we go. So we're going to hit skip here just because, and we'll take this out of screen share. To finish and wrap up here, Instruqt is a browser-based virtual labs platform for education and developer marketing. And being browser-based, that just means that there's nothing to install. And what you're getting out of that is you're getting the platform in which you can run your software in a safe, secure way, but giving your developers and your technical audiences a hands-on experience with your real software. So you want a hands-on experience with your software. The other thing that they think is important is, as we've been talking through our sales cycle today and our sales concepts, is you can see how a sales rep is not required in the early stages. We have customers, for example, that will say, I'm not going to talk to a prospect until they've done at least 3 Instruqt challenges. So it's a really actually nice way to be able to say, okay, Mr. Developer or Mrs. Developer, you're excited about our solution. Here's some Instruqt tracks that we want you to work through. Once they work through that, we would update the appropriate CRM to say, okay, they're ready, and then the salespeople can engage. So from a sales perspective, from a go-to-market perspective, it's a really nice way in which to basically choose when you want to engage with your audience. And of course, it's important in terms of the MQL process as well, right? How do you generate more qualified leads? Get them hands-on, get them doing, get them applying that knowledge. And last but not least, the reason why we like it so much is developers get to enjoy working with the platform. So it's not, it's not a fake kind of thing where they just go in and can do a couple, screenshot type of works. They can actually go in and interact with the software, which makes it really successful. Cool. And for yourselves, by the way, I guess it's important at the end of this is, as creating content, it allows you, a platform like Instruqt, it allows you to focus on the most important thing, which is building great content. You don't have to worry about running environments, installing things, all of that. So at the end of here, we come to the end. I'm going to check for any questions that have come in, but please know that we will be sending you a link that you can take the test drive yourself so you can see that in action. So let me see if we have any open questions. When I'm leveraging Instruqt, what is the best way to think about implementing my solution if I use a web-based interface? Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, is the software, basically you probably have a back end and a front end. One of the things that we often do with our customers and with Instruqt is you're able to run multiple hosts at the same time. And what that means at the end of the day is your software solution can run in either one or multiple instances that we would serve up and you could control. We can show this to you in more detail, but you would be able to serve up your solution in such a way that it is running in its own controlled sandbox. From there, you can define the interfaces that you want to use. So like if your particular course that you want to showcase with developers focuses only on the UI. I know we show the command line an awful lot, but maybe you have an ERP program or something like that. You can just basically serve that up to the developer and walk them through that. Hope that answered that question. All right, next question. When a developer spins up a demo account through Instruqt, can you enable storage for that user so work of developers can persist over the desired time frame of the demo tenant? I think if I understand this correctly, you basically want to persist their work across multiple challenges. That tends to be a common question that we receive, and the answer is yes. And there's multiple ways to do that. So for Instruqt, just so you know, if you haven't seen it before, it's a challenge-based approach. So when we use the word track, that's kind of the entire learning experience, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours. And then within that track, you would have multiple challenges in which you're going to walk the user through. So you can do a couple different things. You could have each challenge independent of, I've seen that where, each challenge is its own aspect of learning that you want to serve up, or you can build on that. So it's kind of like 1 through 8, 8 challenges in your track, and you can actually take that and build as you go. And we also, the one other thing that I call out is we, as part of implementation, we want to build out structures so that we optimize that as well. So that we want to make sure that when a learner has their training environment they're using that, if they walk away, that's fine. We have a timeout feature, so we shut down the instance for that time, but they can log back in and pick up where they left off. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, looking at time, we're close. Is there any other questions that I can answer? We got a shout out on the chat. Thank you, Mark. Greatly decreased lab administration. Yeah, I think that's something we take for granted. If you if you haven't caught that as we walked through the kind of the Instruqt discussion today, we're managing all of the environment for you. So that means, the setup, the running, and the teardown. And if you've ever seen, your cloud invoices, teardown is just as important as setup. So we really focus on making sure that your environment is only running for when the learner is engaging. When they're not, if they've decided if they leave before they completed, we make sure we shut that down. So thank you, Mark. Okay. Well, again, I thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry if there was any technical snafus. Hopefully I did it okay solo here. And I look forward to seeing you. Either contact me directly if you want to have further discussions, or we'll see you at the next webinar. Hope you have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.